following truth. Not what we've been told. Searching your word for what is written, what you spoke. Following truth, Jesus, lead us in your light. Following truth, every page comes alive tonight.
Hello, shalom all. Welcome to Following Truth. As always, I am LJ, and I'm going to be leading us through the study of today. And we're going to be looking at a continuation of this little study that I wanted to put together regarding the King James Bible and the history of the Bible itself, really. And today we're going to be delving into the Septuagint, or one particular aspect of it. We're going to be starting off our study on the Septuagint anyway. This is probably actually going to be at least two, probably more studies, because it's quite a deep topic. So it's one that interests me. It may not interest everybody else, but I'll just say hello to some people here. So Freddie is here as always. Cherubiah. I see Mike and Clate here as well. So appreciating all of you being here, and those that are watching who haven't made comments and just sitting by and listening in. So I appreciate you all being here. And maybe you may get to learn something, or maybe you would like to push back on it and actually offer some information yourself. And I will open this up at the end just for a small conversation if anybody is interested in doing so. I will say that I'll start by saying that actually I think that this is one of the most complex studies that I've done so far. It's a deep study, although in this I haven't gone as deep as I could do, because it's already, there's a lot of information, and it's going to take me quite a while to get through it all. So I hope you've all got a drink, some food, and ready to just delve in to the Bible and some history and some historical writings as well. So we're going to do quite a bit of reading in this particular study, because this is a complex study, and Mike is always ready to learn, so that's a good thing. Hopefully I'll be able to provide you with some information today that you may not have known before, or at least get you your taste buds wet so that you'll want to delve into this more. And maybe actually there are probably people that already know a lot of this information, because I've talked on other channels about this particular topic. So hopefully some people are already aware of, especially my position on what the Septuagint is and the historicity of it. So as always, I'm going to obviously bring up some slides, and we're going to delve, and I've got a lot of slides, and in all fairness, a lot of them are writing. So I'm going to be doing a lot of reading on this particular study, because we're going to look at an ancient thing. Specifically, we're going to be looking at something called the Letter of Aristeas. Now, this is going to be really something that is fundamental to the study that we're doing. The Letter of Aristeas, or Aristeas, as some people say. I say Aristeas. I do apologize if other people say it in a different way. So we're going to be looking at this particular, this is going to be foundational to our particular study. But and this is available online, by the way. It's you can find this particular letter. It's free of charge on the internet. All you need to search for is the Letter of Aristeas PDF. You'll be able to find it. This is J. Thackeray translation of this letter. Now, when I say letter, really, it's actually it's a book. It's the lengthwise, it is a small book. It doesn't really read just as a letter. It's a long, detailed apologetic, really, for the origination of the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So when we talk about the Septuagint, that is what is generally is being referred to is just the Greek translation of the Hebrew. Now, I'm going to make a case that there is no such thing as the Septuagint. And this is part one of it. We're going to be looking at the evidence for it. We're then going to delve into, in another study, the actual, a bit more deeper into the Greek itself, the actual translation itself. But this is going to be an important part of our study. So I'm going to bring up my slides as always. This is Following Truth, as you know. But for those that are new here, or your first time listening to this study, I hope that you'll at least give me the opportunity to present the case. I know that this is kind of one of those things where a lot of people will just disagree with me automatically. It's just common knowledge that there is a Septuagint, but I'm going to present a case for something else other than the Septuagint. So it is my contention that there is no such thing as the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament. Now, what do I mean by that? And that's this is the interesting thing. What do I mean by the Septuagint? Do I mean a Greek translation? Do I mean all Greek translation? What do I mean? Well, I mean one specific thing. So first off, it's important that we understand what the general understanding of the Septuagint is. I know that a lot of people hear this term floated about as if it's just, factual. Jesus and the apostles quoted from the Septuagint more than they quoted from the Hebrew. It was the Bible of Jesus's day. These are all statements that are made. So did Jesus and the New Testament authors actually quote from the Greek Septuagint? Now, like I say, I think most people will say, of course they did. But there's nuances to it. There's more to it than that. So I'm going to start by reading some of the websites out there. When you search for what is the Septuagint, this one is from, I can't remember this one from, I think it's from, bear with me 1 second. This one is from, is it Christian? No, Catholic.com, this one. So this is the statement from Catholic.com. And they say, by the 1st century, the LXX was the Bible of Greek-speaking Jews, and so was the most frequent used version of the Old Testament in the early church. For this reason, it was natural for the authors of the New Testament to lift quotes from it while writing in Greek to the church. But while the New Testament authors quoted the LXX frequently, it does not necessarily follow that Christ did. We know for certain that Jesus quoted the Hebrew Old Testament at times, since he read from the scrolls in the synagogue. But Jesus could have only quoted from the Hebrew, and the New Testament authors later used the Greek translations to record the fact. Either way, it doesn't matter, because the Greek New Testament is inspired, and the Holy Spirit chose to have the sacred authors repeatedly cite the LXX. Now, the LXX is just the Latin way of writing Septuagint. So LXX is 70 in Latin Roman numerals. And Septuagint is basically just Greek for the 70, or 70. So it doesn't matter if Jesus was quoting scripture in Hebrew or Aramaic, if the Holy Spirit chooses to use the Septuagint when translating his words into Greek. The importance of the Septuagint is demonstrated no matter which of these is the case. So the Catholics.com is saying the importance of the Septuagint. And they continue on saying, but since you ask, here is an example where the Greek Gospels present Jesus as quoting the Septuagint in Mark 7:6-7. Jesus quotes the LXX of Isaiah 29:13 when he says, well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching doctrines of the precepts of men. So this is just at the moment, I'm just giving you the kind of the information of what you'll find on the internet if you search for what is the Septuagint. This is the Catholic.com. Then there is which one is this? Christianity.com. This one. So if you type in Septuagint and you find Christianity.com, and it will say Jesus and the apostles studied, memorized, used, quoted, and read most often from the Bible of their day, the Septuagint. All right. So again, asserting that there is such a thing as the Septuagint. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to just quickly look into these. So Clate says, literally just heard someone say that about the Greek being quoted in the New Testament a few days ago. Yeah, this is RJ, when you called it Latin the other day, that threw me off, since I always heard it as Roman numerals, never Latin. But now I know. Well, yeah, it's Roman numerals, it's Latin. Is kind of the same, one and the same. So yeah, it is just the Latin or the Roman way of saying Septuagint. Okay, and then we have also this one is scripturecatholic.com. So of the approximately 300 Old Testament quotes in the New Testament, approximately 2/3 of them came from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And notice they're saying the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which included the Deuterocanonical books that the Protestants later removed. Now, remember that they're saying that it includes the Apocrypha, basically. Or at least the Deuterocanonical books. So remember that as well. And now, if you go to Britannica.com, you will see Septuagint, abbreviation LXX, the earliest extant Greek translation of the Old Testament from the original Hebrew. The Septuagint was presumably made for the Jewish community in Egypt, when Greek was the common language throughout the region. Now, these are important statements that you must remember when we're delving into this. What is it? It's the oldest or the earliest extant Greek translation of the Old Testament from the original Hebrew. And it was presumably made for the Jewish community in Egypt when the Greek was the common language through. That's the reason why. And furthermore, we have one more. Which one is this? I've forgotten which one this is. But the Septuagint, or LXX from the Latin Septuaginta, literally 70, sometimes called the Greek Old Testament, is the earliest extant Greek translation of the Old Testament from the original Hebrew. It is estimated that the first 5 books of the Old Testament, known as the Torah or Pentateuch, were translated in the mid-3rd century BCE, and the remaining texts were translated in the 2nd century BCE under Christian auspices. I can't even read that one. The Septuagint includes the Hebrew Bible as well as the Deuterocanonical books of the Christian Old Testament, considered the primary Greek translation of the Old Testament. It is quoted a number of times in the New Testament, particularly in the Pauline epistles, by the Apostolic Fathers and later by the Greek Church Fathers. Now, we are going to delve into the actual quotations not today, but in another study. We're going to actually delve in and look at some of those quotations and see whether those quotations really are quotations of the Septuagint, or what they are actually quotations of. Now, furthermore, the full title, I don't even need to read this. Where did I get this one from? I'm not even sure where I actually. Oh, this is was that Wikipedia? That last one. This one might be Wikipedia or Septuagint.net. Yeah, that last one was the Septuagint.net. I won't bother. I won't be. I think I've read enough of those. I won't. Oh, this is Septuagint.net. Yeah, let me read one more. Yeah, it's pronounced Deuterocanonical. I know. I'm having a Gavin moment. So it's from Septuagint.net anyway. Septuagint, sometimes abbreviated LXX, is the name given to the Greek translation of the Jewish scriptures. The Septuagint has its origin in Alexandria, Egypt, and was translated between 300 and 200 BC. Widely used among Hellenistic Jews, this Greek translation was produced because many Jews spread throughout the empire were beginning to lose their Hebrew language. The process of translating the Hebrew to Greek also gave many non-Jews a glimpse into Judaism. According to an ancient document called the Letter of Aristeas, it is believed that 70 to 72 Jewish scholars were commissioned during the reign of Ptolemy Philadelphus to carry out the task of translation. The term Septuagint means 70 in Latin. It doesn't. It means that's in Greek, and the term and the text is so named to the credit of these 70 scholars. Now, this is a lot of statement that you can find online, just readily available. But how true is all of this? Remember what is actually being stated here. Now, according to the Letter of Aristeas, it is believed that 70 to 72 Jewish scholars were commissioned. Well, is it 70 or is it 72? The term Septuagint means 70 in Greek. LXX is Latin. And the term is so named to the credit of these 70 scholars. Okay. So it's important to know what, according to tradition, the Septuagint is. According to the tradition, if you speak to people today, they will tell you that it is a translation created by 72 Jewish men, translated during the reign of Ptolemy II, which is around about 285 BC, for the non-Hebrew speaking Jews in Egypt, and it is the complete Old Testament. that is what, and there's lots of other kind of information regarding this as well, such as, the what particular piece of info. We'll delve into, actually, I'll leave that, because I actually want to get into that when we get in the way that it was translated. So I'm going to get into that in a moment, what people say or have said about how it was all put together and translated. So this is important to know, that when you go online, this is what really the Septuagint is. A translation created by 70 to 72 Jewish men. That's important. Is it 70 or is it 72? And it was translated during this particular reign, and it for the specific reason that the Hebrew-speaking Jews in Egypt. And it is the complete Old Testament. And I'm sure that most people understand it being the complete Old Testament. When you talk about the Septuagint translation of like Isaiah or something like that, notice that the Catholic.com even said about when Jesus quoted Isaiah, he is quoting the Septuagint. So this is what is understood, that Jesus quoted Isaiah, the Greek Septuagint version of this. So anything other than that is not Septuagint. Okay? The Septuagint is a particular translation of the Greek, of the Hebrew into Greek. It is that translation. It is that translation that happened during the reign of Ptolemy II by those Jewish men for that reason, and it is the complete Old Testament. Anything other than that is not Septuagint. We know that there were other translations made. Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotion, Origen, all of these people translated the Hebrew from the Greek, from the Hebrew into the Greek. All of these are post-Christ. So these are not pre-Christ translations. None of those can be classified as Septuagint translations, because they are not the 70 translators who translated it in Alexandria during the reign of Ptolemy II for those Greeks, for those Greek-speaking Jews in Alexandria, as it is stated. None of these can be classified as Septuagint. They are Greek translations, but they are not Septuagint translations. So it is really important to distinguish between a Greek translation and the Septuagint translation. The Septuagint is a specific thing. Anything other than that is not Septuagint. Now, this is Brenton's introduction to the Septuagint. So this is Brenton, who translated the or created a version of the Septuagint that we have today. We have quite a few Septuagints today. We have Brenton's Septuagint, Ralph's Septuagint, Sweet Septuagint. Then there are other Septuagints out there. There's no one particular Septuagint today. There are a number, but Brenton, who I would say arguably is probably one of the most popular translations, or Septuagint translation. It's the one that you'll find on Bible Hub. The actual reading, the English anyway, if you go into the LXX, I think it's normally Sweet's translation. But the Brenton says, "We need not wonder that but little is known with accuracy on this subject about the translation. For with regard to the ancient versions of the scriptures in general, we possess no information whatsoever as to the time or place of their execution, or by whom they were made. We simply find such versions in use at particular times, and thus we must gather the fact that they must have been previously executed. So he's saying that we don't know the information regarding these translations. Now, Jobes and Silva, the invitation to the Septuagint, wrote one of the authoritative books on the Septuagint. And this is, I'm reading this because people will quote scholars, and scholarship states lots of things. So we're dealing with scholars to deal with scholars. So this is Jobes and Silva. They said, strictly speaking, there really is no such thing as the Septuagint. This may seem like an odd statement in a book entitled Invitation to the Septuagint, but unless the reader appreciates the fluidity and ambiguity of the term, he or she will quickly become confused by the literature. One might think that the Septuagint is the Greek version of the Bible in the same way that the Vulgate, for example, is the Latin version. The difference between them, however, is much greater than simply the language used. The Vulgate was largely the work of one man, Jerome, at one time at the end of the 4th century, and in one place, Bethlehem. As a result, the Latin Vulgate is characterized by unity throughout. Not so with the Septuagint, which was produced by many people unknown to us over 2 or 3 centuries, and almost certainly in more than one location. Consequently, the Greek Old Testament does not have the unity that the term the Septuagint might imply. Now, remember what the Septuagint is. It is one translation done by one specific set group of men at one specific time in one specific location. They are telling you that this is not the case. So anything other than that is not Septuagint. They continue on and said, in fact, there was no one uniform Greek version of the entire Hebrew Bible, just individual scrolls that had been copied from other scrolls through the ages. For instance, a medieval Greek codex might contain the Greek of Genesis copied from a manuscript produced in the 1st century of our era, and containing the translation originally made in the 3rd century BCE in Alexandria, while the text of Esther, bound in the same codex, may have been copied from a manuscript produced in the 4th century of our era and containing a translation made in the 1st century BCE in Jerusalem. There is no such thing as the Septuagint. It's a Greek translation, but it isn't the Septuagint. Now, there's also, continue on with Jobes and Silva. Given these typical uses of the term Septuagint, one might understandably, though mistakenly, infer that the Greek translation found in a given ancient manuscript or modern edition is a homogeneous text produced in its entirety at one point in time. In fact, no such homogeneity exists in any collection of the Greek books of the Old Testament. Each edition, whether an ancient hand-copied manuscript such as Vaticanus or a modern printed book such as Rolf's edition, is an amalgamation or amalgam, with each section of the Bible having a long and separated textual history. The books of the Hebrew Bible were originally translated independently into Greek by different translators over several centuries. Then they were all compiled together and we get the Septuagint. And it is asserted that, it was all done by the 72 translators in Alexandria 285 BC, and it's an inspired text. Not so. Not so. We have no evidence that any Greek version of the Hebrew Bible or even the Pentateuch was called the Septuagint prior to the 2nd century of this era. The Septuagint used to, it wasn't called that. It wasn't called the Septuagint. Now, the word came into English from Latin Septuaginta, 70, a shortened form of the title Interpretatio Septuaginta Veravarum. I don't speak Latin. I barely speak English at the moment. The translation of the 70 men. This title arose from the Greek word for the 70. Which had been used by 2nd century Christians referring to writers to refer to the entire Greek Old Testament, even though only the first 5 books were traditionally said to have been produced by 70, either a round figure or an abbreviation of 72. So what we understand, or what is asserted as being the Septuagint, it just is not such a thing. Dr. Eugene Ulrich, now he's a professor at the University of Notre Dame. The oldest extensive manuscripts of the Septuagint that are extant are dated in the 4th century, at least a century after Origen. And Origen, if you know, produced the Hexapla, the 6 different translations, where he put the 6 different translations of the Hebrew Bible there. So we cannot always be certain that our Septuagint text corresponds to that of his day, either in its pre or origenic or post-origenic form. We do not, and Origen did not, have extant for any book that anyone would consider the original form of that translation. All manuscripts display a considerable amount of textual development. Certainly unconventional changes, such as well-known panoply of errors, but also intentional changes, such as clarifications, revisions, duplicates, and harmonizations. So what he's basically saying there is that we don't know what the Greek form of any kind of reading prior to the 4th century actually looked like. Now, we can go back and look at some of Origen, but we don't know prior to that if it looked the same. So even if there was such a thing as, a translation of the Greek, we wouldn't know if the Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus that we have today would match that. We don't know. So the Septuagint that we have today is basically Codex Vaticanus, but we have no idea whether Codex Vaticanus matches with, let's say that translation did happen back at the time, that we would have no idea if it matched. It could be a completely different Greek text. What we have today is a Greek text that exists 300 years after the New Testament was produced. And we're calling that the Septuagint, and we're reading that back into the text, what Jesus would have had. We have no idea whether that would be the case. We cannot tell that, because we don't have any way of being able to tell that. All we have is a 4th century text that comes 300 years after Jesus. And we have stories about a translation being made, but we have no idea if that translation that we have today matches it, even if there was such a thing. And as we've looked at already, we can tell that there was no singular translation made of the entire Bible by these 72 translators. 70. Is it 70 or 72? We're going to look into that. But the information is already starting to look dubious. What is so solidly said, Jesus and the disciples, they quoted from the Septuagint. Already we're seeing some holes that maybe it's not quite as solid and as we might, what I used to think about it. I used to hear this all the time. Jesus and the disciples quoted the Septuagint. But when you delve into it, it's not quite as solid as you might think. F. Bruce, now he's another famous scholar, says the Pentateuch seems to have been the only part of the Greek Old Testament of which a standard text was established by Jewish authorities. The Jews might have gone on at a later time to authorize a standard text of the rest of the Septuagint, which it wouldn't be Septuagint translation. It would just be a Greek translation of the other books. It cannot be Septuagint because it has to be, the Septuagint is named after those 70 translators. But for reasons which will be mentioned below, lost interest in the Septuagint altogether. With but few exceptions, every manuscript of the Septuagint which has come down to us, this is important. Every manuscript, with a few exceptions, of the Septuagint, which has come down to our day, was copied and preserved in Christian, not Jewish circles. It's the Christians that are doing this text, keeping this text. The Jews are not using it. They're not passing this information down to us. They are not giving us the Septuagint translation. This isn't coming from the Jews. This is coming Christian translation. And why? Because the Christians of that time could not speak Hebrew. So there may be reasons why they needed a Greek translation of the Septuagint, of the Hebrew. And so you need a good reason in order to believe that these Greek texts are superior or as good as these Hebrew texts. Because I want to use the Greek because I can't use the Hebrew. So I need to use the Greek. But what if the Greek isn't as good as the Hebrew? Well, if we say that the Greek is better than the Hebrew, now we can use the Greek with all our conscience, no problems whatsoever. We can just use the Greek translation now. Even though we don't know who translated it, when they translated it, how they translated it, in what manuscripts they used, how accurate to the Hebrew that would be. We know for a fact that the Greek Septuagint today is very different than the Hebrew, but it's automatically asserted that the Greek is better because we assume that was the Bible of Jesus's day. It's the Bible that was translated by the 70. And so obviously it has authority. And so when it disagrees with the Hebrew, it must be the Hebrew that is wrong and not the actual Greek that is wrong. These are assumptions that are made that are just asserted as if they are true. So, Jack Mormon said, Paul Cowell, a famous Old Testament scholar who has done extensive work in the Septuagint, does not believe that there was one original Old Greek version and that consequently the manuscripts of the Septuagint, so-called, cannot be traced back to one archetype. The theory proposed and developed largely by him is that the LXX had its origin in numerous oral and subsequently written translations for use in the services after the reading of the original, the Hebrew original. Later, an official standardized version of the law was made, but did not entirely replace the older versions that were created, while for the rest of the books, there never was a standard Jewish translation, but only a variety of versions. So it's really important that we look at the evidence now for the Septuagint. And we come back to the letter of Aristeas. Now, why do we come back to the letter of Aristeas? Because the letter of Aristeas is our only primary source for there being a Greek translation. It is on this letter that all other sources of evidence base the facts upon. And what we'll find is that they strongly disagree, contradict, and do not follow what the letter of Aristeas says. Now, the letter of Aristeas is our earliest and only pre-Christ information on the letter of on the translation of the Septuagint. It's the only piece of information that comes to us pre-Christ. We have one piece of information, this letter. Now, there's a problem with this letter, is that so yeah, this is our primary source, but there is a problem. Now, I'm going to read Bruce Metzger because, I'm using scholars because scholars are, this is an argument that scholars will use, that there is a Septuagint. So I'm using scholars in order to kind of argue against scholarship. I'm going to go into the evidence itself, but I'm using scholars because scholars defeating and pushing back against other scholars. Now, Bruce Metzger is probably recognized as one of, if not the leading scholar of the modern kind of age anyway. And now he says most scholars who have analyzed the letter have concluded that the author cannot have been the man he represents himself to be, but was a Jew who wrote a fictitious account in order to enhance the importance of the Hebrew scriptures by suggesting that a pagan king had recognized their significance and therefore arranged for the translation into Greek. So actually, it seems that from what Bruce Metzger is saying, is actually the letter wasn't really to push forward this Greek translation, but actually to show the world how important the Hebrew text was, because this Ptolemy II wanted these Hebrew texts because they were so important. Because, and we're going to get into it in a moment, what the actual letter says. But this is being discredited. This letter, it's generally dated to around the mid. Kind of 2nd century, so 150 BC to 100 BC. So it can't have been written by this Aristeas, who claims to have been sent by Ptolemy II to Jerusalem to arrange the translation. He would have been dead long before that. That was, 285 BC. This is the letter is somewhere around 100 to 150 BC. So he's 135 years old, or that kind of time, roughly, which is probably not really likely. And older than that, really. So it's been discredited. So this letter, which is our kind of authority and our primary source, is wrong. It's not even what it says that it is. The man that wrote this claims to be somebody from 135 to, I don't know, 185 years prior to when this was being written. So this brings the doubt into actually the importance of this letter. But this is our letter. This is the information that gives us all of the details about the creation of the Septuagint. All of the other information, we're going to look at Philo, we're going to look at Justin Martyr and Clement of Alexandria and Irenaeus. All of these men base their information on this letter. And they copy the letter. They utilize the letter. They get the information from it. They contradict the letter. But this letter is not what it claims to have been. And this is our primary source. This is our oldest information about the translation. Now, when I'm going to read you some of this, I'm going to have to bring this up and make it so it's a little bit bigger for you to be able to kind of follow along. So this letter, as I say, this letter of Aristeas is long, and I'm not going to read all of it because that will take us a long time. What I want to do is really just give us some of the important information that we've already looked at, which we've already established about this translation, and what the most authoritative or earliest and most cited piece of information actually gives us, right? What that is telling us about the translation. So let's bring this back up again. So Demetrius of Phalerum, as keeper of the king's library, received large grants of public money with a view to his collecting, if possible, all the books in the world. So this is important to remember. The reason why, because it's not for Greek-speaking Jews in Alexandria. It's because they are collecting all the books of the world. And by purchases and transcriptions, he, to the best of his ability, carried the king's purpose into execution. Being asked once in my presence, in Aristeas' presence, because this is claiming to be Aristeas, about how many thou Satan's books were. This hasn't this hasn't actually come up very well. I'm going to have to go and read the letter of Aristeas from the actual source itself. Sorry, you will be able to follow along with this, but when copying over, some of the letters have not particularly copied over well. But anyway, so I'll read it anyway. Demetrius of Phalerum, as keeper of the king's library, received large grants of public money with a view to his collecting, if possible, all the books in the world. And by purchases and transcriptions, he, to the best of his ability, carried the king's purpose into execution. Being asked once in my presence about how many thousands of books were already collected, he replied, more than 200,000, O king, and I will ere long make diligent search for the remainder, so that a total of 500,000 may be reached. I am informed that the Jews also have certain laws which are deserving of transcription and a place in your library. What is to hinder thee, then, replied the king, in this task? For all the necessary means are at your service. And Demetrius answered, translation is also required, For in the Jews' land, they use a peculiar script, just as the Egyptians have their system of letters, and speak a peculiar language. It is commonly thought that they used the Syrian language, but this is an error. It is another dialect. And when the king had learnt all the facts, he gave command that a letter should be written to the high priest of the Jews, in order that the proposal above mentioned might be carried into effect. Now, this is important. This is a really important study, and look at this. It was because King Ptolemy wanted all the books of the world. Nothing to do with wanting Jews in Alexandria couldn't read Hebrew. And nothing to do with that. It was one man wanting all the books of the world. And it was the laws. Now, the laws are the Torah. They are the Pentateuch. They are the 5 books of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Not the entire Bible. The Letter of Aristeas tells us that it was the law that they referred to, not the entire books of the Hebrew Bible. It was the law. And actually, Letter of Aristeas will repeat this over and over, that it was the law that they asked about. So, and as others have, as I've read already, they understand this. They know that this is referring to the Pentateuch, which is just the Greek way of saying the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. So we have to understand that when we're looking at this, it is only the 5 books. And what reason? Because Ptolemy wanted all the books of the world. Now, let me see if the next slide has copied over any better. You can still read this. It's just some of these as not transferred over quite as well as I would have hoped it to. But then it goes on. If then it be thy good pleasure, O king, a letter shall be written to the high priest at Jerusalem, bidding him send 6 elders from each tribe. How many is 6 elders from each tribe? 6 times 12 is 72. All right. So the Letter of Aristeas tells us that it's 72. So where they get, why they call it the Septuagint, it's not based because of the 72 translators. That is an incorrect name for it based on the Letter of Aristeas. Now, what's also important to notice here is they are sending 6 elders from each tribe, men of the highest repute and versed in their country's law, in order that they may test therein the mere part agree, and so obtaining an accurate translation, it may deposit it in a conspicuous place. Right. 6 from each tribe. The Levites were the only ones who were the ones that had rule over those books. Those were the ones that copied it. Those were the ones that taught the law. All right. So why are they sending 6 from the tribe of Judah? That makes no sense whatsoever, that they would send 6 from each tribe. But anyway, it is 72 according to the Letter of Aristeas. That gets changed, but we'll see who changes that from 72 to 70, and the reason why they change it. So, in a manner worthy of the undertaking and of thy gracious will, fare ever well. When this memorial has been presented, the king ordered that a letter should be written to Eleazar on these matters, informing him also of emancipation of the captives. So what the letter actually talks about, if you read the letter in any detail, is that in order as kind of an exchange for them sending these 72 men to translate the Hebrew into Greek for this library. They agreed to actually, or King Ptolemy supposedly agreed to free a load of Hebrew slaves that were in Egypt at that particular time, as a goodwill gesture that he would free these slaves. He sent money and stuff in order to get this done as well, but as a goodwill thing, we're going to free these captives, and you'll send these translators to do this translation for us. He presented also towards the construction of bowls and vials and a table and cups, and for libations, 50 talents weight of gold and 70 talents of silver and precious stones, a great number. So, and then he also that they might desire, and some stuff for sacrifices and other purposes. So he sent all of this kind of money for them in order for them to do this translation. Now, this is continuation of the letter of Aristeas. Now, since we desire to confer a favor not on these only, but on all Jews throughout the world and on future generations, it is our will that your law be translated from the Hebrew tongue in use among you into Greek, that so these writings also may find a place in our library with the other royal volumes. Again, this is the law. It is 72, and it is for the purposes of going in the library. And it is not the Jews' idea. It isn't the Jews that have said about this translation. They don't need a translation. They have their own scriptures. They're reading their own scriptures in their own language. Right? They don't need this translation. This is the translation done by for King Ptolemy's library. Thou wilt therefore do well, wilt repay our zeal, if thou lookest out 6 elders from each tribe. Now, they are the ones asking for the 6 elders from each tribe. It's the Egyptians. Well, not the Egyptians, but the Greeks in Egypt that are asking for the 6 tribes, 6 members of each tribe. Well, they don't know. They don't know about the Hebrews. So why would they know anything about who was in charge of these laws? But again, it says, well versed in the law and able to translate, that we may discover therein the more part agree, for the investigation concerns matters more of the ordinary import. We therefore straightway offered sacrifice. I've already read this. We don't need to read that. Right. So let's just reassess the letter of Aristeas. The law only was translated. It was 72 men, not 70, made the translation, 6 from each tribe. The translation was for the purposes of the king of Egypt's library, King Ptolemy II. Translators worked alone in this. All right. That's an important thing, and I haven't read that, but the letter of Aristeas says that the men, they all translated on their own, and then they came together and they compiled their work together. They compared it, looked at it, and they all agreed on their translations. That's the letter of Aristeas' formation of this, which is important. But then we come to our second piece of information. And our second piece of information doesn't come until Philo of Alexandria. Now, he lived, I think it was 50 BC to 25 AD. So he was a contemporary of Jesus. The information that we have comes from the writings in the after Jesus has already been All right, so he's already been born at this time. This is AD writings. And Philo actually gives us slightly different information than what that letter of Aristeas did. But remember, that letter of Aristeas is discredited and is not authoritative. And among the Ptolemies, Philadelphus was the most illustrious. For all the rest put together, scarcely did as many glorious and praiseworthy actions as the one king did by himself, being, as it were, the leader of the herd, and in a manner the head of all the kings. He then, being a sovereign of his character, and having conceived great admiration for the love of the legislation of Moses, conceived the idea of having our laws translated into the Greek language. So now we've moved. Philo is contradicting the letter of Aristeas. The letter of Aristeas says that King Ptolemy was given the information about these laws, but no. Philo is saying that it was King Ptolemy's idea, because he had a love of the legislation of Moses. The legislation is the law, by the way. So that's the 5 books. But now Philo is telling us that it was the idea of Ptolemy. And immediately he sent out ambassadors to the high priest and king of Judah. Philo is saying that the high priest was the king, for they were the same person. Israel didn't have a king at the time of Philo. He didn't have a king at the time that Ptolemy lived in 285 BC. There was no king. And the high priest certainly wouldn't have been the king, because the high priest can't be king. There's only one high priest and king, and that's Jesus. So this is completely wrong, this information that Philo is giving us. We can discredit this. How can you trust this? How can you trust the letter of Aristeas? Which one of this is correct? Exactly, Freddie. There is no king who is high priest apart from Jesus Christ. He is our king and priest. There was no king and priest at the time when this translation supposedly took place. Considering these translators were not mere interpreters, but hierophants and prophets. So now Philo is giving us information. This is why people hold on to these translators were something special. Philo's telling us that there were prophets. Well, if a prophet is translating it, of course that would be authoritative, surely. To whom it had been granted in their honest and guileless minds to go along with the most pure spirit of Moses, on which account even to this very day there is every year a solemn assembly held on a festival celebrated on the island of Pharos. No historical evidence for that festival apart from Philo. Nobody else mentions anything to do with a celebration which celebrated this translation on the island of Pharos, to which not only the Jews but a great number of persons of other nations sail across, reverencing the place in which the first light of interpretation shone forth. I don't think there's anything factual in what we've just read there. There's no historical evidence of that. And Philo is saying that those translators who did that translation were actual prophets of God. That's just, there's no information anywhere saying that they were prophets of God. So Philo of Alexandria tells us, and that's really Philo's statements regarding this information. That's what we get. That's what we're getting from this. Philo wrote, and I've left out a fair bit, but nothing real too much is added to that. It was Ptolemy that had a love for the law of Moses, which only Philo states. The number of translators is not mentioned, but he says that they were prophets. The law was translated, which does agree, but they were prophets, and all their words agreed, never disagreeing, which obviously would be the case if they were prophets. Or that should be the case, because if they're prophets, they should agree. But this is Philo. This isn't the Letter of Aristeas. This disagrees with the Letter of Aristeas. The Letter of Aristeas never says anything about prophets of God. Now, now we're moving forward in time, and we're now coming into the 2nd century AD. Right? We haven't really got much information about this translation, but we're going to go to Justin Martyr because he's important. There were then among the Jews certain men who were prophets of God. So Justin is picking up on Philo, through whom the prophetic spirit published beforehand things that were to come to pass, ever they happened. And their prophecies, as they were spoken, and when they were uttered, the kings who happened to be reigning among the Jews at the several times carefully preserved in their possession, when they had been arranged in the books by the prophets themselves in their own Hebrew language. So he's calling them prophets. And when this was done, the books remained with the Egyptians. There they are until now. So the translations were done, and they remained there with the Egyptians, where they still are. They are also in the possession of all the Jews throughout the world. So apparently, all the Jews throughout the world were using the Septuagint at the time of Justin Martyr. Factually incorrect. But they, though they read, do not understand what is said. So actually, I take that back. He may not been saying that they were using it, but they had it. But count us foes and enemies, and like yourselves, they kill and punish us whenever they have the power. For in the Jewish war, which lately raged, Barakah Kabdabas, the leader of the revolt of the Jews, gave orders that Christians alone should be led to cruel punishments unless they would deny Jesus Christ and utter blasphemy. In these books, then, of the prophets, we found Jesus our Christ foretold as coming, born of a virgin, growing up to a man's estate, and healing every disease and every sickness, and raising the dead, and being hated and unrecognized, and crucified, and dying, and raising again, and ascending into heaven, and being called the Son of God. We find it also predicted that certain persons should be sent by him into every nation to publish these things, and that rather other among the Gentiles than among Jews, men should believe on him. Now, Justin Martyr's making a kind of I don't know why it's. I think the translation or this, when I've copied this over, I've used AI to create obviously these slides, and I don't think it's translated. It is transferred over. Yes, the Bar Kokhba revolt. That's what it should be. Anyway, so Justin is making an argument, really, that that for the Septuagint being a prophet-inspired, but he talks about the prophets, the books of the prophets. So I think Justin really could be understood to be going beyond the books of the law and now going into kind of the prophets as well. So he doesn't actually number the translators again, but he does call them prophets. Now, he does say that the king of Egypt wanted all the books. and it's the books of the prophets that were translated. So that story does, but much of the story does not match the story of Aristeas. And he seemed to be making an argument that the Greek translation had kept or brought forward the prophecies of Christ that were not apparent in the Hebrew. And then we come into Clement of Alexandria. So much for the details respecting dates, as stated variously by many and as set down by us. It is said that the scriptures, both of the law and of the prophets, were translated from the dialect of the Hebrews into the Greek language in the reign of Ptolemy, the son of Lagos, or according to others, of Ptolemy surnamed Philadelphus. Demetrius Phalaris, bringing to this task the greatest earnestness and employing painstaking accuracy on the materials for the translation. Now notice that Clement of Alexandria is gone beyond the law, and now he's directly telling us that the law and the prophets were translated at that time, which contradicts the Letter of Aristeas, which said that it was only the law. Clement of Alexandria is telling us that that translation included the law and the prophets. And he further goes on and says, for the Macedonians being still in possession of Asia, and the king being ambitious of adorning the library he had at Alexandria with all writings, desired the people of Jerusalem to translate the prophecies they possessed into the Greek dialect. And they, being the subjects of the Macedonians, selected, right? So Clement of Alexandria is telling us that the reason why they had to, they didn't have a choice. They had to do this because they were the subjects selected from those of highest character, among them 70 elders. So Clement now changes it from, he's saying that it's the books of the law and the prophets, and now he's telling us that it's 70, not the 72 as others have said, versed in the scriptures and skilled in the Greek dialect, and sent them to him with the divine book. So now he's saying that they actually went with the Hebrew scriptures, and each having severally translated each prophetic book, and all the translations being compared together, they agreed both in meaning and expression. For it was the counsel of God carried out for the benefit of Grecian ears. It was not alien to the inspiration of God, who gave the prophecy also to produce the translation and make it as if it were Greek prophecy. So Clement of Alexandria is saying that this is Greek prophecy inspired by God. 70 and the law and the prophets. Clement of Alexandria is literally making stuff up here. He's adding so much information that it was inspired. It's just, the information is just factually incorrect here, and it just doesn't correspond with any of the other history that we have regarding, or the others that we've read regarding this. So he says that that the translator translated several books as well, not all of the books, just several of the books, and they all agreed. Now we come to Irenaeus. Now we're coming towards the late 2nd century now. For before the Romans possessed their kingdom, while as yet the Macedonians held Asia, Ptolemy the son of Lagos, being anxious to adorn the library which he had founded in Alexandria with a collection of all the writings of all men, which were works of merit, made request to the people of Jerusalem that they should have their scriptures translated into the Greek language. And they, for at that time, they were still subject to the Macedonians, sent to Ptolemy 70 of their elders. So Irenaeus is continuing on this 70. This is where we get the 70 the Septuagint, the LXX, the name, even though the original says 72. Who were thoroughly skilled in the scriptures and in both the languages to carry out what he had desired. But he, wishing to test them individually and fearing lest that they might purchase by taking counsel together to conceal the truth of the scriptures by their interpretation, separated them from each other and commanded that they all write the same translation. So here, Irenaeus is saying that he was worried that they were going to translate it wrong, and that they were going to try to conceal the truth of their scriptures and actually translate it wrong. So he separated them into individually, but he said, I want you to all make the same translation. Again, this is a very different story than what we get in the Letter of Aristeas, and what we've read in the others as well. Furthermore, he said he did this with respect to all the books. Right. So when Irenaeus says back here, he says about the skilled in the scriptures, they wanted the scriptures translated. Irenaeus doesn't mention about the law or the prophets. He just calls them scriptures now. He did this with respect to all the books. But when they came together in the same place before Ptolemy, and each of them compared his own interpretation with that of every other, God was indeed glorified, and the scriptures were acknowledged as truly divine. For all, where do you think that people get the information that this Septuagint is superior to the Hebrew text? Getting it from nonsense like Irenaeus, that it was inspired by God, the translation. For all of them read out the common translation which they had prepared, in the very same words and the very same names from beginning to end, so that even the Gentiles perceived that the scriptures had been interpreted by the inspiration of God. So Irenaeus is saying that all of the scriptures were translated individually. They all came back and had exactly the same scriptures, and it was inspired of God. Irenaeus is writing in the 2nd century AD, by the way, the end of the 2nd century AD, 100 years and more after the New Testament has already been written. Justin Martyr is writing a minimum of 50, maybe more than that, a lot more than that for some of the books already been written. Since, therefore, the scriptures have been interpreted with such fidelity, and by the grace of God, and since from these God has prepared and formed again our faith towards his Son, and has preserved to us the unadulterated scriptures in Egypt. For the apostles, since they are of more ancient date than all these heretics, agree with the aforesaid translation, and the translation harmonizes with the translation tradition of the apostles. For Peter and John and Matthew and Paul and the rest successfully, as well as their followers, did set forth all prophetical announcements, just as the interpretation of the elders contains them. So Irenaeus is basically telling us that Peter, Paul, John, Matthew all used these Greek translation. And then we come into Tertullian, which is like the 3rd century AD. In ancient times, the people we call Jews bear the name of Hebrews, and so both their writings and their speech were Hebrew. But that the understanding of their books might not be wanting, this also the Jews supplied to Ptolemy, for they gave him 72 interpreters. Now, Tertullian goes back to the 72. men whom the philosopher Menedemus, the well-known assertor of providence, regarded with respect as sharing in his views. The same account is given by Aristeas. So Tertullian is quoting, or he's referring to the letter of Aristeas. And that's where he probably gets that 72 from, because he's going back to the letter of Aristeas. So the king left those works unlocked to all in the Greek language. To this day, at the temple of Serapis, the libraries of Ptolemy are to be seen with the identical Hebrew originals in them. He's saying that at his time, the Hebrew originals were still in the temple of Serapis. They'd taken these Hebrews, left them there, the Hebrew text, left them with these, with King Ptolemy, and they were still there. The Jews too read them publicly. The Jews apparently were reading these in the temple of Serapis, under a tribute liberty that they in the habit of going to hear them every Sabbath. Whoever gives ear will find God in them. Whoever takes pains to understand will be compelled to believe. So, going back. Variations in ancient accounts of the Septuagint. The number of translators. Aristeas says 72. Later writers vary between 70 and 72. Some of them don't specify any number at all. Aristeas says that the Torah only was translated. Several later accounts expand the scope, prophets, or even all the books, as Irenaeus says. And obviously, what we know is that all the books are translated, apparently, because all the books would have to be translated as part of that Septuagint in order to be Septuagint. Otherwise, they're not Septuagint translations. So when somebody says that Jesus, like the Catholic website said, that Jesus quoted the Septuagint of Isaiah, well, the only way he could read the Septuagint Isaiah is if Isaiah was translated by those 70. This is why it becomes a necessity for those books to have been translated by the 70. In Aristeas, the translators worked separately. Then they compared the works together to produce a single approved text amongst them. Philo and Irenaeus heightened the miracle, saying that they were perfect unison translations, and that they worked separately, but they came back. Philo says that they worked together, but Irenaeus says that they worked separately, but came back with identical wording. Clement gives a hybrid. Each book was done separately, but then they compared them. Tertullian is silent on the method. So, coming back to this, there is no such thing as the Septuagint. The Septuagint was originally a specific translation done by specific translators at a specific time in history. If that original event didn't happen, then there is no Septuagint. Now, whether it did happen or not is also for debate. But let's say that it did happen, as was stated, then we only have the Torah, which could possibly be considered to be Septuagint. A Septuagint translation does not necessitate that what we have today would be that translation, but only the first 5 books could be Septuagint translation. The earliest renderings that we have of that are Philo and the Letter of Aristeas. Only those 2 could be considered even around the time of Jesus. All of the others are 150 to 200 years after Jesus and the New Testament has been written. All right. So all of those, and they're Christian rendering understandings. They're not Jewish. The Jews weren't using this. At best, the Septuagint can only refer to the Torah. At best. But that creates a problem for the rest of those books. If those 72 translators, Jewish translators, did not translate Isaiah, Jeremiah, Malachi, Psalms, or any of those other books, then we don't know who translated them. We have no idea. We don't know where they were translated. We presume that they would have been done in Egypt, somewhere around there. We don't know why they were translated. Could they have been for that library? Could they be for the non-speaking Jews? We don't know. We don't know what method was used, how they translated it. And we certainly don't know how accurate to that Hebrew that they would have translated it from. If Stavros, the Greek student who was studying Hebrew for a year, translated those into Greek, would you hold that as authoritative? Would you now think that was a translation that we should hold on to? Is that what we would consider to be authoritative translation? Why would Jesus be using that? Why would we assume that Jesus was using that? So this is the importance of just this particular. We're going to go in our next study. I'll look into the actual some of these supposed quotations of the Old Testament in the New Testament from the Septuagint. We're going to look at some of those which Jesus supposedly quoted. But the important thing to take from this is that what we have today, if you pick up a Brenton Septuagint, right, which is predominantly Codex Vaticanus, we don't know whether that matches the Greek that preceded Jesus, that Jesus would have quoted from, if such a translation had happened. We don't know whether that Greek matches that Septuagint translation. We don't know. We don't have it. It's not part of what we have. What we have are post-Jesus, post-New Testament Christian books. We don't know if they match. Now, I'm going to make an argument in the next study. Actually, I won't make. I won't say what. No, I will. I'm going to make I'm literally going to make the argument that the quotations of the New Testament, or the quotations in the New Testament that seem to match the Old Testament Greek, the Septuagint, are actually later adaptations. The New Testament is written. The Greek of the Old Testament comes later and is adapted to match the Greek of the New Testament. So rather than the Greek, the disciples and Jesus quoting the Old Testament Greek, in fact, I'm going to make an argument that the Greek Old Testament is created in order to match the Greek of the New Testament, because they couldn't work out why Jesus would say it is written, or Paul would say it is written, and then didn't quote it word for word. So you have to remember as well that most of these people, Justin Martyr and all of these later Christians that are coming in, they don't speak Hebrew. They have to have this Greek translation. They need a Greek translation. We don't know who did it. Now, we know that there were Greek translations of the Hebrew. We know that. As I pointed out already, there's numerous people that tried to do this, but we don't really know whether how accurate they were and how good they were, or whether they were used. But we do know that people did attempt translations. We really, many other people could have made translations. We don't know whom that Greek that we have today, of the Old Testament, we don't know who created it. We don't know when they created it. We don't know what Hebrew they were using. So when it disagrees, when the Hebrew disagrees with the Greek, because of the likes of Irenaeus, who is saying that it was inspired, and modern textual criticism believes that that the Greek is the Greek that the disciples would have used, they're already assuming that these are authoritative. But I would disagree with that. Anyway, I'm going to finish there. It's been an hour and a half. So a lot of information been put forward in this study. I know it was probably a bit more than I would have. No, not more than I would have liked to. It's less than I would have liked to have provided. But I also understand that an hour and a half is on a complicated topic is quite hard. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully people have been interested. I will open it up for if people want to discuss it. We will be discussing the Septuagint. I'm nothing more than the Septuagint. But if you want clarification on something, or you disagree with something, or you want to come up and tell me you agree with me, I'm brilliant, you could do that. Feel free to come up and do that. I'll quite happily take that. But if you want to say I'm stupid and you disagree with me, feel free to come up and tell me that as well. I'm sure there are plenty of people that disagree and believe that Jesus quoted from the Septuagint. But yeah, I'll post the link, and if people want to come up, and you feel free to do so. If you don't, I will close out and say thank you very much for watching. Appreciated you being here. The study that I've presented basically is available on my website, which is followintruth.com. There is much more detail than what I presented today, with all the writings as well, all the quotations, and without me making any mistakes as well, obviously. As I'm reading and I'm trying to follow along with my own, sometimes I confuse myself, especially when I can't read. But yeah, well, I don't know where we go from there. Then I'll leave it with there. I don't know if Freddie is still in the house, whether Freddie is going to be going live after this. If Freddie is live, I may see you over there. We haven't had any comments for a while, so I'm hoping that I'm still live. Freddie is still here. Maybe all the information I'm providing is so intriguing that people stop commenting, and they're in such aghast with my presentation. Hey, Freddie, nice to see you here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, good job. Another nice informative study. The question I always have with it, because I don't believe that Jesus nor the apostles quoted from it, because I don't really believe it existed prior to that. Although I've thought about it, it may have started to be written because of maybe the Old Testament, but obviously it wasn't nothing to do with the New Testament, even if it was around 3 BC, as some records show potentially. It wouldn't have any of the New Testament because Jesus didn't start preaching until 30. So we're looking at least 30 plus years after, if the Septuagint was BC. So to say that Jesus quoted from it, where they would put something in the New Testament, is like after the fact. Because and you've shown that it doesn't line up as if it actually came from the Hebrew. There's discrepancies there.
Yeah, they don't agree. There's and one of the biggest things for me, if you go back to one of those slides that I pointed out, that it says, of the Septuagint was quoted basically 2/3 of the time. That makes absolutely no sense if the Jews were using Greek and the Greek Septuagint. Why would they just not have quoted the Greek Septuagint all the time? Right. Why did they go to the Hebrew if the Greek Septuagint was so authoritative? It was the Bible of the Jews at the time. Why didn't they use it all the time? Why did they go to the Hebrew some of the times? Now,
that's an excellent point.
In my understanding, I can explain that because, like I say, I can explain that those quotations are inserted into the Old Testament after the New Testament has been written. But for those that are saying that Jesus and the disciples used the Septuagint, it makes no sense that sometimes they used, or most of the time, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they went, this authoritative Greek text that we all use, we won't use that one here. We'll use the Hebrew instead. And that makes no sense whatsoever. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that's just an excellent point and observation. And I've always kind of felt that way in my kind of ignorance of not studying it like you have to. And what you've provided is confidence in what I believe. So I applaud you, and you've done a great job to help people come to this understanding.
Yeah, I want people to understand that, and the thing is that for me, these kind of claims were all there to give the Greek translation, which I do believe that there were BC translations, or there were BC attempts at a book or something. I don't believe in a BC full translation of every book. I certainly don't, like I said, don't believe in that full translation done by the 70, the Septuagint. So they are just Greek translations. I do believe that all of this information about this inspiration of the Greek was in order to give the Greek translation that the Christians were now using post-Jesus, because they couldn't use the Hebrew, they had to use the Greek. They had to give it kind of an authoritative feel to it, to make it stand out, and to make it something that they could use in order to argue against the Hebrews, against the Jews of the time, and say, we can speak Greek, so we have access to this this Old Testament writings. And so I think that it was all done just on the basis that it was done to push forward what the Christians of the time were using, when really there was not much authority in it. And when it disagrees, that's when these Christians at the time and Christians of today are saying that the Greek is superior, and it should be the Greek that we follow, not the Hebrew. And I'm just not one of those people. I hold to the Hebrew, and I do not hold. And I know that you're the same. You don't hold to the Greek authoritative scriptures of the Old Testament. So, yeah.
What do you What do you say to Astutic's comment that about that one?
Yeah. So actually, what we're going to that is what I'm going to do on the next study of this Septuagint study, is look into the supposed quotations of the Old Testament from the New Testament. So we'll look into Jesus and Paul and some others that supposedly quote from the Old Testament Greek, and show actually that even then they don't align. So, if even the Greek doesn't have to align with the Greek, that's an argument to show that quotations don't have to be word for word. Quotations are not word for word. And in fact, actually, there are many, many times when actually Jesus doesn't just quote from one place in Luke. He actually quotes from two places of Isaiah. Because actually, and we've seen this in the study when I talked about Mark, when it says in Isaiah the prophet. Well, it's not in Isaiah the prophet. It's in Isaiah and it's in Malachi, because the New Testament doesn't quote the Old Testament word for word, or rarely does that. It's picking and choosing from selected bits of the Old Testament that it actually wants to use. We see this with Paul, and I'm going to show, and I have done on the channel, I know that I've done it with you before. I'm going to show where Paul actually quotes from like 8 different places, and the Septuagint just chucks it all into one verse because they didn't understand what Paul was doing, because they didn't understand the Old Testament. They didn't speak the Hebrew, so they just chucked it all into one verse. It says, as it is written. Paul quotes from 8 different places of the Old Testament, and the New Testament, whoever wrote this whoever did the Greek translation of that particular place just went, I can't find that. Okay, I'll just take all of that. He must have I'll take the first bit. I know he's quoting this verse, so I'll just put it all into that verse. So we know for a fact that,
I think
it's just
when I have these conversations about the gospel, all the naysayers, well, look, all the 4 gospels, they don't match up. This contradicts this one. The stories are very similar, and they get the primary message correct. But as I've stated, you have witnesses, and everyone's going to speak in their own viewpoint, what they see. It's not going to be verbatim. So what I see here, when it says they like Jesus, like this, for example, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense if it's actually verbatim, because then you have this other viewpoint of, well, they just copied it. How do you know he said that? It's word for word, exactly word for word. So anybody could just say what they said because it resembles exactly what was written in the Old Testament. But I think there's a twist here, because God said he's going to put his words in the mouth of the prophet. And of course, there's going to be similarities to prove that, yes, he's referring to this specific scripture in the book of Isaiah or whichever book. And there's going to be a very close, similar overlap with a few different words to show that, hey, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years have gone by. You think they're going to speak in a verbatim? You're only going to be verbatim when you're going to literally read from the book. But Jesus is speaking the words of God that God gave him to speak.
Yeah. Now I'm going to show as well. There are times when even God quotes somebody and doesn't quote them verbatim. All right. And that, I could do that now, or I could wait until the next. When I'll wait and delve into do that when we delve into the quotations. But one thing I'll show is that God when Sarah laughs, when Sarah, he comes to Sarah and tells, she's going to have a child, and Abraham, they're going to have a child. He actually doesn't quote what Sarah says. He doesn't quote it word for word. He paraphrases what she said back to her. So if God can paraphrase and God can doesn't have to be word for word, then I don't think anybody else needs to worry about whether something needs to be word for word or not. So,
right, because that scripture too is so close. The Spirit came upon me, and the other one will say the Spirit will come on my servant. So I mean, it's just people just need to really study and pray and read and pray and just search for the truth and seek honestly.
Yeah. I just we're going to delve into all of those quotations and just show that really the claims regarding the quotations and then I'm going to also show differences between what we have today available in the Septuagint, where there's differences between the Septuagints that we have available today, and those manuscripts. I want to show the differences, especially Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, because those are the two best and most authoritative manuscripts that we have. I'm going to show how they literally just do not align with each other. Hey, Clay.
Hey, how are you, man? How's everybody?
Wait, the great.
Yeah, indeed, man. Very Cleat, man. Righteous Cleat works too,
Yeah, right. Righteous Clement the Great.
Well, that's making it longer, man.
Either
way,
Clement the Great.
Yeah. Thanks all the same, though, man.
How are you, Clay?
I'm doing well. God is good. How are you guys?
Well, I'm tired. No.
Did you give yourself a brain drain with all that, man?
Yeah, it's not an easy topic. I understand it's a complicated topic, talking about things that a lot of people. I'm not mentioning anybody at all, but I'm just saying that this is. Sometimes it can be complicated. It's hard for something. I've studied this subject really deeply, and I still find it complicated and hard to work out what we're talking about in any specific time. But this Septuagint needs to end. That term, the Septuagint, really needs to be wiped. And when I said to you before, I think, modern textual criticism, when they're building their house, but they don't realize the foundation is gone. And the house is still remaining, but only because they haven't been pushed yet. The foundation is gone, and when they're pushed, it will fall. It only looks like it's solid, but it's not, because the foundation is gone. And the foundation is the whole basis of their belief that there was such a thing as a Septuagint done by these 70 translators, which there wasn't.
Yeah. So maybe you should just start calling it the Scamtuagint. You know what I mean?
I would definitely agree with that. Or just call it a Greek translation that nobody knows who did or when.
Yeah, but it's just so much easier to call it the Septuagint.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's the point. Like you're saying, you're saying to be honest about it, but they've got this narrative going on, and like you say, like I didn't realize that there were many other Greek translations, and you're saying these are all from the Hebrew text, right? When they're talking about the Greek text, they're talking about the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of great.
There are a number of translations done.
Right, and the Septuagint is only one of those, and they're basically always saying Greek or the Septuagint, and basically referring to all of them.
Yeah,
right?
it's like it would be like, and actually, I'm stealing this from Tovia Singer, so I'll acknowledge that I am. But the analogy works, and actually, I was using something else, but I think it works better. It's like you getting a Pepsi and calling it Coke.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would
You
never
have
do that.
you get any cola and you call it Coke. But
Mhm.
not all colas are Coke. They're all colas, so it's like they're all Greek translations, but they're not all Septuagint. The Septuagint
Right.
is one particular thing.
Right.
Coke is one particular thing. Pepsi is another thing. They're both cola, but they're not the same. They're different. And that is
Right.
the same with the Septuagint and any other Greek translation, is that the Greek translations, they're all Greek translations, but there's only one Septuagint. And the
Right.
problem is that there's not enough evidence for the Septuagint, and it certainly isn't the entire books of the Old Testament.
So when you say that too, that was the other point that you made. When they say the Septuagint, they mean the Torah itself. That's it, right? That's the point that you were making.
Well, if you're going to go, and if we're going to say that there is any authority in our two earliest pieces of evidence, which is kind of the Letter of Aristeas and Philo, those are our two real big pieces of information.
Mhm.
Then you can only say that the law, it is only the law, it's only the first 5 books. So that means that Isaiah, which Jesus quoted from, is not Septuagint. It is a Greek translation done by somebody at some point, but it couldn't even be Septuagint, even if we had, even if that translation did happen and we still had it today. It still wouldn't be Septuagint of Isaiah, because Isaiah would not have been included in that translation. It is a Greek translation done by somebody, but we don't know who.
So just to get you're saying if Jesus did read a translation that was in Greek, that's what
Mm-hmm.
you're saying. If he did read
If he
something
did,
that was in Greek,
he wasn't reading the Septuagint.
he definitely wasn't reading the Septuagint, because the Septuagint, based on definitely the sources that the 2 sources that we know of, right? They only say that it's the Torah. So Jesus, or the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament that
Yeah,
Moses gave us. All right.
exactly. So if Jesus read from a Greek translation, that is what he is reading from, a Greek translation. He is not reading from the Septuagint translation. He's just reading from somebody's Greek translation of Isaiah, who we have no idea. So how can you give any authority to that? How would Jesus have given? We don't have any information about, God suddenly changing from Hebrew to Greek and saying, this is the authoritative books that we're now going to use, apart from people like Irenaeus who are saying that they're prophets, and or Justin, and they're prophets and inspired by God.
Yeah, it's nonsense on its face. Just
But
saying that, I hear that.
this comes from later Christians, apparently.
Yeah, well, who? But you're saying that later Christians are saying that these people said that the people that translated the 70 were all prophets, which that's insane on its face, dude. To say that every
Yeah,
single one of the 70 prophets, just because they're translating,
all
that's
came and
ridiculous.
translated the books. Yeah,
Nah, that's ridiculous.
yeah.
That's
There's
ridiculous.
no historical evidence apart from those which are Christian 200 years after Jesus. Nobody ever mentions that. We have Philo that calls them that. Why Philo calls them prophets, I'll never know.
Yeah, that is a great question. Why would he say something like that? But then I guess this is going back to also, what kind of man was he as far as like his honesty and his integrity and all that he wrote? You know what I mean? Like, was he
Well,
known for being an
Philo's a
embellisher?
strange one, yeah. Philo's a strange one. Not that I've massively bothered to study
No,
Philo.
but what you know of him from people
Yeah,
that do actually study it pretty
his
good, they would
understanding
say
of
what?
scripture. Yeah, his understanding of scripture is that it was all allegorical, and we have to
Oh,
understand it.
I remember you saying that. Yeah, and that's
Mm.
telling you a lot about that guy too, man.
Yeah, I wouldn't take what Philo said as a kind of authoritative for me.
Right. He would probably be a good starting point of figuring out what was wrong.
Yeah, I
That's
think
nuts, man.
I don't know about this statement, Astutic. They were already preparing your minds to accept the Aramaic over the Hebrew. Well, I think they're really they're preparing you to accept the Greek over the Hebrew. That's more the case, is that they want you to use the Greek of the Old Testament over the Hebrew, and when the Hebrew disagrees, it's the Hebrew that is wrong.
Seems like the Aramaic is what's going on now, more since Islam.
Yeah.
Islam wants to push the Aramaic because they use it to say Jesus cried out to Allah, even though it's on the cross, but they deny the cross, so they're kind of in a predicament. But they push the Aramaic.
Yeah, I couldn't care about it. But like, so what your whole thing is he's saying God when you translate it into English. But like, we do that with the Hebrew or the Greek. So what's your point, Muslim?
Well, it's the
all he's saying is God.
Eli. Yeah, and see, that's something I would like to see. Maybe you do something on that. Why Matthew has it in Hebrew Eli and Mark is
Eloi
or Eloi, yeah, and
is Eloi in the Aramaic and Eli what Matthew records. Yeah, we do. I will expand on that because I know that we had a little bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, and those other ones where they call the girl in the Aramaic, and those other few scriptures I sent you,
which is all
he calls her Tabitha.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, which is all in the Gospel of Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, hey, to go to that thing about the Hebrew too, just to say that they were using the Greek, right? This goes back to that question that I asked you about when they found that book of Isaiah with the Dead Sea Scrolls, like what language did they find that written in? And when was that believed to have been written, right? And I think you said it was probably around 150 BCE.
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls would be dated anywhere between 150 BC and about 50 AD. So not past 70, but about 50 AD, I would say. And certainly not a lot of them would actually be AD writing. Well.
Right, but still, it goes to the point of, even if you get the closer you get to the time of the closer you get to the time of Jesus, and even after that, if the claim is that they're writing stuff in Greek because that's the language people are using inside of Israel, right? Why would these people be translating the book of Isaiah into Hebrew rather than the Greek? Right, so that only goes to support that they were still using Hebrew.
Oh, of course they were using the Hebrew. This argument
rather than the Greek,
we were not using it. Notice that argument, which I brought up by the Septuagint or whatever it is, making an argument that they were translated for the use of the Jews in Alexandria. No historical evidence gives us that. We don't even have any information about that. They weren't. That wasn't the reason why those books were translated for the Jews, and it certainly wasn't for the Jews in. That would have meant that the Jews would have gone over, translated those books, left the Hebrew there, but brought back the Greek.
Yeah, that's stupid. Yeah, come on.
Back to Israel at that time, and then eventually they just started to use that translation that is inspired because they inspired it over in Alexandria, and then they brought it back with them, even though they were leaving it for the library, but they must have made another copy of it, brought it back, and then when they started to speak Greek, apparently, they started to use that translation because that's the inspired translation. And so it all just, you have to make so many nonsense claims in order to make this work. I don't buy it. I don't believe that they were speaking Greek at that time. I don't believe that Jesus quoted the Greek. I don't believe that the disciples quoted the Greek. I think they were using the Hebrew. And I don't believe in all of the reasoning behind the information, what they say.
It really is sounding nuts. Like, could you imagine it? Like, you're gonna say, like you just pointed out, they're gonna take Greek books over to some place, translate it into another language, then leave their language or their God-given language ones over somewhere else, because these people don't understand the value of things, right? I mean, that's more like a modern day thing where we realize the value of documents. I mean, who cares if they didn't really have writings that often there because stuff was so expensive? So clearly they knew leaving the Hebrew behind wasn't a bad idea, right?
Well,
and just in case people are missing it, I am seriously mocking that thought. There's no way you leave the original language behind when you could be telling yourself we're going to use these later. We're just taking them with us. Period.
Exactly. And I think that there is a case. There is a case that the translation was done in Alexandria. Whatever Greek that we have, it was translated in Alexandria, and that was for Jews of that place. But that wouldn't make it authoritative. It wouldn't mean that it was inspired, and it wouldn't mean that that's what Jesus was using back in Israel. Was some kind of translation done for Jews in Israel, in Alexandria? There's possibly, but it certainly isn't something that Jesus was using back in Israel, and there would have been no reason for him to have done so. This is why this claim regarding that Jesus wasn't using that the Jews weren't using the Hebrew at the time of Jesus, because it gives more credence to this Greek translation. There's a reason why Jesus was using it now, rather than just like strangely they're all speaking Hebrew, but Jesus quotes from the Greek. Oh no! Well, if we say that Jesus was, that there was no Greek, there was no Hebrew at that time, then of course they have to be speaking Greek, and that's why Jesus could. So it's all done to give authority to, but we've. That's been proven wrong now. We know that they were.
Can I ask a real basic question on that? And maybe because Greek isn't going by any other name, right? They just call it Greek, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my stupid, simple-minded self would like to ask if that's the common language, the lingua franca at the time, right?
The lingua franca, yeah.
Yeah. If that's the language everybody knows there, tell me, please. What languages did Pilate have written over Jesus' head? Was Greek one of those?
He wrote in Hebrew, Latin.
Is that Greek? Yeah, well. Is Hebrew Greek?
No, but it is.
Okay.
Hebrew.
What other language?
Latin.
Is that Greek?
No, that's not Greek.
Okay. What was the other one?
I'm sure it was Greek, wasn't it?
Was it Greek?
Was it? I'm sure it's Greek.
Okay, I could be wrong about that because I remember it being written in 3 languages, right?
Yeah. What was the third language you thought?
I wasn't sure. I'm asking, but I was thinking it may have been another.
Yeah. Now you got me
I'm confusing
myself,
you. Okay,
sure,
but the point. But look, the point is here.
I'm sure it's Greek.
Good. So that helps them, because I was possibly thinking Aramaic for some stupid reason. But either
Some
way, look,
translations put. Are you talking about the languages on the cross?
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, Hebrew, Latin, and
some
Greek, and there was a
okay,
few where they'll say Aramaic instead of Hebrew.
Aramaic instead of the Hebrew. Yeah,
okay. But that's still leading me to the question also, even if they had Greek there, right? They put the languages that were common in that area, right?
in that area, which would have been, even if you want to make it Aramaic instead of Hebrew, it's still not. It still shows that they were speaking their own. They were speaking a language. They weren't
Right.
using
A lot of
speaking Greek.
people, a lot of people, and they did it right there in that area, right? A lot of people would have been speaking, because otherwise, why would he have wasted his time having it written in Hebrew when nearly nobody wrote or read or spoke it,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
right?
I think it
So,
shows that it was a language, that was being used at that particular moment in time.
right, because if they put it in Latin, right, how far away would the origin of the Latin religion, or I'm sorry, not religion, but the language itself, have come from and made it to that area, where you would have had to have had a lot of people speaking that language if they wanted people to read that, right?
Mm.
Because
Well,
again, why would
obviously,
he have wasted his time writing it in Latin if people weren't speaking it there?
yeah. So obviously, the Latin was written there because of the Romans, because that would have been their kind of native language. But the
Right.
Greek would have been the was the lingua franca of the time. So that was like the English of the time. So you'd have people in their native places speaking their native language, but then they would also speak Greek. So it's there in Hebrew because the Jews spoke Hebrew. It's there in Latin because the Romans spoke Latin, and it is written in Greek because that would be the common language. So it shows that all three of those languages were there. So the Romans wouldn't have spoken to the Jews in Latin, and they wouldn't have spoken to them in Hebrew. They would have spoken to them in Greek because that would have been the common language, which is why the Greek is there. The Latin is there for the Romans, and the Hebrew is there for the Hebrews. It's really simple.
Yeah,
That's
indeed.
why
And
the Hebrew was there, because they spoke Hebrew.
right, and now, because it came to my mind, too. You remember toward the end of the book of Acts, right, when Paul addressed the Jews? Did it
Yeah,
say what language he spoke to them in?
Hebrew.
Yeah, Greek.
Did it say
In the Greek
Oh,
language, and then on the road to Damascus, it
no?
said
Not
that Jesus spoke to him in the Hebrew language, and then when he was before the
yeah,
court,
he
he
speaks.
started to speak Greek.
He does
right,
speak
but
to some people in Hebrews in the Hebrew language at
yeah, when
Right.
he
some
was
point.
being taken, toward the end of the book, he starts to speak because the officer asked him a question, because he started
Yeah, he
speaking
spoke
in
in the
another
Hebrew and
language.
he spoke in Greek. That's the main two.
Okay, yeah, I'll look that up. Yeah.
And
But
then
I'm
Jesus
saying,
Yeah,
speaks
he
to
does.
him in Hebrew.
right,
Look,
and
Yeah.
that's an important
So
point.
if Paul's
See,
speaking in Hebrew after the time of Jesus, and Jesus is speaking in the Hebrew, that ought to tell you something. That Hebrew is still the spoken language that Paul's still speaking,
right, so
yeah,
they
as
they
well as
can
there's
Greek.
just
four occurrences. There's four occurrences in the book of Acts where Paul speaks Hebrew.
right,
Well,
but I'm
sorry,
talking
three occurrences where Paul speaks Hebrew, and one where I'm sure Jesus speaks Hebrew
right, and
to him.
I'm speaking specifically about the one when he was in that crowd and he asked to address the people, the Jews, right?
Yeah,
So what
that's Acts
language,
21:40. Yeah,
right, does it say what language he started to speak in there?
Hebrew,
Because this
the
is
Hebrew
going to say
tongue.
a
Yeah,
lot too. If they're in Israel, near the temple right there, and he's speaking in one language to the officer, and then he starts to speak, another language to the people there,
Hmm.
and if it tells us what that language is, it's kind of nuts to say, well, no,
Actually, he gets
but
questioned. He actually gets questioned and said, "Oh,
by the officer, right? Yeah. But,
you speak Greek?" So it was like a
oh, okay.
wow.
Well, what does
Are
that
you?
say?
Can you speak Greek? Wow. It was
Yeah.
like a um it was a surprise that this
Yeah, we should
Hebrew could speak Greek.
we should read that account just to see what it says. But that's another thing then. If that guy said that to the Jew, what was Paul speaking in if he heard Paul speaking? If he was surprised by this guy talking Greek to him, knowing he wasn't a Greek or a Roman, right?
Yeah.
So that
I'm
is
trying to
saying a
find
lot.
the
Like,
verse.
right, yeah, just right there in the text, that is saying a lot, and it's really smacking down people's arguments. Well,
I think it's
talking in
in
Greek, reading
it's
in
in
Greek. No, well, there you go,
Acts
guys. They're
21.
reading in Greek, but nobody in the area apparently is speaking it, because even the Roman officer is surprised that he knew
Yeah,
Greek.
that's Acts 21, I think. Yeah. So.
Yeah, when he spoke Hebrew and Greek. Yeah, like you say, they asked him,
Yeah.
"Oh, do you know Greek?"
Yeah, he said, and in verse 37 it says, and as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? So, yeah.
So
Right.
who was he asking him because he spoke to him in Greek?
Yeah, he spoke to him in Greek. So he would have spoken to him in Greek and said, oh, wow, you speak Greek? How are you speaking Greek?
Right, to me.
Which would have meant that, it wasn't normal for the people around that area to speak Greek.
Right, because if he's surprised by that, it couldn't have been common for them.
It would have been, they were speaking, well, actually,
No, they were speaking Aramaic.
Yeah.
What chapter and verse was that?
21.
There's 21.
37.
Acts 21. Down the bottom, 37. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this idea is still common today, to just push forward this understanding that the Jews were not speaking Hebrew, they were speaking Greek, and that Jesus quoted from the Greek, and it's inspired, it's authoritative, it's better than the Hebrew, and I have serious issue with that. I just I don't put the authority in the Greek over the Hebrew, which is why I use the Hebrew. And this is those that say that anyway. When you hear people discussing this, I don't know how many times I've heard it where they'll jump between the Hebrew and the Greek. As I made a video on this about the selective scholarship, they jump between the Hebrew and Greek, whichever one best supports their point that they want to make. Sometimes they'll go to the Greek, sometimes they'll go to the Hebrew, and just and it frustrates me when I see people do that, jumping from one to the other, as if you can do that, as if like there are two readings for you to read from, and you choose the one which best suits you. Actually, one of them is right, one of them is wrong, and you don't get to just arbitrarily pick one because, oh, this one suits me, so I'll use the Greek in this verse, but I'll use the Hebrew in this verse. Well, no, you don't get to do that. One of them is right, one of them is wrong. If you're going to choose the Greek, that's your choice. Don't go you can't claim that Jesus quoted the Septuagint and go, right, well, I'm going to choose the Hebrew now because it better suits my theology. And that happens all the time. And it's not right. It's not right. But anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna. I don't know, Freddie, whether you're gonna go live in a bit or not.
No, I won't be able to. Also, I won't be going live tomorrow. My granddaughter has a graduation ceremony.
Okay.
So, plus the remodel, they left early. They left around 9 p.m. your time over here, and they'll be coming tomorrow, making some more noise. So it wouldn't matter because I would, if I did go live, it would be later. But I'm gonna have to be at the ceremony anyway. So hopefully
Okay.
Friday.
No problem. No problem.
All right.
I'm going to close that. I've got to be honest. I've had I had too good a sleep in the last week or so.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Be blessed and sleep well. Take care.
Yeah. Well, I
Take
appreciate
care,
you
Clay.
coming up, Freddie. Thank you very much for being up.
See you later, Freddie.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Ah! Whoa! Hang on.
I'm not ready to go yet, Clay. I'm
No.
going to give you a chance to say whatever you need to say.
Yes. Yeah. Read the very last verse in chapter 21. Read the very last verse in chapter 21.
Where he says about speaking in the Hebrew.
Yeah. Did you read that and I missed it?
No, I didn't actually read that. I said that he was speaking Greek and Hebrew at the time. So
that's
he
fine.
spoke to the soldier in Greek and the people in Hebrew.
That is fine, but let's read this right out of the text so people can see that it's right there in the Bible and it said what Paul is speaking. It said it right there. It
says, verse 40, and when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people, and when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue.
There you go. He spoke to the Jews in the Hebrew language.
They will argue that that means Aramaic.
Yeah, I don't care, man. Whatever. They weren't speaking in Greek. Whatever, man. They
will argue that was Aramaic.
Whatever.
Yeah. But it does show that the people were spoken to in non-Greek because they weren't speaking Greek.
There you go. So they speak Aramaic and they read Greek. Does that make sense to you people? Like, do you like getting called the dumb fool? Because that's what they're calling you when you read this. And I don't care if they say it's Aramaic, but you're apparently speaking Aramaic, but you read Greek and understand that. Yeah, okay.
Exactly, Clay.
Why are we getting played for idiots by people, dude? They are really.
Yeah, it is a shame, and hopefully people have been able to, hear some arguments against this Septuagint and understand that. Go to the Hebrew. Go to the Hebrew. The Hebrew is the authoritative script. Go to the Hebrew.
Amen.
Yeah. And having said that, I am going to play us out with a Hebrew song about Jesus in Hebrew that I created through AI, as always. But this one is just written in it wasn't written in Hebrew. It was written kind of in English, but it's now been translated by the AI into Hebrew so that I could present it to you in Hebrew. So here we go. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed. We're going to do another study. You're going to delve into those quotations, look at those quotations of the Old Testament in the New Testament and look at what's going on there. So we're going to delve into that on our next study. So I appreciate everybody being here. If you are new, please give the video a thumbs up and a like, and obviously you'll be kept up to date with your normal when I go live, you'll be kept up to date. I am going live at the moment maybe twice a week, so there's a lot of information that I want to present. So yeah, I'm trying to do twice a week, but do appreciate you all being here. Hopefully you've learned something, or you can give me some pushback. And a lot of information presented. It could go a lot deeper into it, to be honest. If you want to, it is available on my website, followingtruth.com. You can go there. There's more study on this. so you can read it for yourself there. I'm going to play us out with a song about our Messiah in Hebrew. But I appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much.
שלח אלוהים ישוע אל עמו להושיע את ישראל מקבלו על העץ הוא נשאר התקרבנו בחסדו פדה את נפשנו ישוע משיחנו הוא הדרך הוא האור מקרב יהודים וגויים לחסות תחת כנפיו אמנו צלב וצולח ברחמיו תמיד הוא שומך לב אבן ללב בשר הוא הופך אל האמת אותנו מושך כל עין תראה כל פה יודע ישוע משיח לנו הוא הדרך הוא האור מקרב יהודים וגויים לחסות תחת כנפיו הוא נושא אותנו בידיו רופא את השבור ועייף קולו קורא בכל רחבי העולם בואו אליו עוד כולם ישוע משיחנו הוא הדרך הוא האור מקרב